I usually cycle outdoors.
Nice.
So my wife got a Peloton during when COVID first started. I had made fun of her for getting the Peloton, but now I'm on there almost every day. So
Oh, it's great.
that's been right. Do you have one?
Yeah, yeah. I got one back in January, which it was the best decision I've ever made.
Now I don't make fun of it. I have my favorite instructors, but
Okay, which ones?
Leanne Hainsley,
Mm.
Allie Love, um, who else is there? The one that always does rock music. I'm trying to blank on her name.
Emma Lovewell?
Em Lovewell, yeah,
I do like her a lot.
really good. Well, I think you go through steps. You kind of start with ones that are pretty, like for basic level, then you start working with ones that really work you
Get more
out.
intense.
So
Yeah,
I'm
my
sorry, God.
no, I was gonna say my favorite is Ali Love, her Sundays. I'm like I religiously do her Sundays with Love rides.
They were fun. I did it last Sunday. It was very spiritual.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, no, they're great. It's a great way to reset for the week.
So I'm starting a hashtag on Peloton. I have a MA Science hashtag. I'm the only one there now, but I would love it if you could be, my first other person to have that hashtag.
Absolutely. I'll definitely join you.
Awesome.
I don't know if I'll be embarrassed by my stats though. Maybe I like don't want you to look at my how slow I ride.
We got to get some M&A competition going. That's the whole point.
That's true.
We got to get a scoreboard. So I'll challenge anybody else in the M&A community on a Peloton ride.
That'd be
Shall we
awesome.
get our interview going?
Yeah, let's do it.
I think we're good for live streaming. All right. All right. Welcome to M&A Science Live. Putting together companies is complicated, and taking them apart is even more complicated. We take lessons from real practitioners and enable them through the M&A platform, through Deal Room platform in this podcast series. We interview leading M&A practitioners to learn lessons from their experience. Learning proven techniques is key to optimizing your M&A practice. If you're interested in learning more, connect with us at our networking events and access our educational resources at mascience.com. And also, first, you can hear about a first here, but we're going to have a holiday virtual summit coming up this December 9th and 10th. So we have speakers from Microsoft, Cisco, AstraZeneca, more to come. But if you want to learn more about that event coming up, we have free registration available. That's at mascience.com. I'm your host, Kison Patel, CEO and founder of Deal Room. Today, I'm here with Johanna Tseng, M&A Integration Leader at Coinbase. She's an M&A expert with a demonstrated history of leading acquisitions through integration in high-growth environments. Johanna is skilled in due diligence, cross-functional leadership, business unit partnership, and company-wide program development and implementation. Today, we're going to talk about how proactive integration engagement can differentiate value in deals. How are you doing today, Hannah?
Good. How are you?
Doing great. Can we kick
I'm
off with
excited to be here.
maybe telling us a little bit about your experience?
Absolutely. So I got my start at Mercer, which is a consulting firm, and focused there on M&A consulting, a lot of due diligence for private equity firms, dabbled a little bit into integration planning as I got more interested in it, wanted to move away from the risk management numbers assessment and more into strategy and long-term vision for a lot of larger Fortune 100, 500 companies. So after doing that for a little bit, fell in love, went to WeWork, was part of their beginning of their integration program development, and then after that left New York and then joined Twilio out in the Bay Area because I wanted to really get into tech. So started their M&A integration program about a year and a half ago, and am now at Coinbase.
They all sound like very boring roles.
Yeah, the most boring.
Yeah, slow moving companies, just nothing to break, nothing
Yeah,
to go wrong.
it's funny. I always tell people they always say you work all the time, you have crazy hours. Why do you continue doing it? And I was like, every deal is different. I wouldn't want to do it if I didn't like being kept on my toes. There's there's no 2 days that have ever been the same in my entire career.
I agree. I think that's what makes a lot of fun. That's good. What
Yeah, yeah.
are So, I guess one of the things that I've noticed through these interviews that's shifting is our whole focus in M&A. Traditionally we've always focused on valuation, the strategy, finding the deal. But now all of a sudden there's this big emphasis on integration planning, much more so than there was previously. Why is that?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting trend, and you'll even see it that my role even exists now as an integration focused person. But we always have corporate development focus on the valuation, how much the deal we're going to get on this company, that it can further our strategy, new customers, new market, new region. But then we're now realizing that there's a huge gap in the what now. We've spent so much time investing in this company, financing it, and we have this great set of talent, tech, but what do we do with it? How do we build that into our existing roadmap? You have two entirely separate bodies of companies with different operating models, different financials, different approaches to product, different cultures. And there's a huge gap in how do you even merge those? And it's not an overnight practice, as I'm sure you've seen in a lot of your top conversations. This is like a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year work. And you have corporate development who's on to the next big thing, right? Leadership, board of directors, they want to buy the next big thing to further our strategy even more. But then you have this huge investment that isn't actually seen through. So there's so much more interest and focus now on actually making sure that we get the right ROI for these big investments.
I think that's what it comes down to. I think they're realizing that, hey, there's a statistical failure rate and maybe the returns aren't there or the original thesis didn't meet all its objectives. So it sounds like that's a big driver. Can you
Yeah,
share
and
with,
it's
sorry, go ahead.
sorry, I'm gonna say no, it's so common. I've in my free time, I read a few M&A articles, and you'll see that the rate for failed acquisitions is much higher than you would think. It's well over 50%. So, and it's because and acquisitions typically fail because you miss the integration activity aspect of it. So, absolutely, that's the realization nowadays, and doubling down on integration activities is more important than ever.
All about integration. Either make value or break value.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you share with us how you position yourself in a proactive way to optimize the integration planning process? Where do you insert yourself in the deal process?
Yeah, so I love having worked for the companies I do because they're pretty small, they move really agilely, and it's really easy just to reach out and say, "Hey, what are you working on?" And it's a little different when I either report into corporate development itself, because then at least we're under the same hood. I hear about what is in the pipeline all the time. But if not, if I sit in a separate org, which I also have, then I usually have weekly check-ins. I have to have strong relationships with the folks in corp dev to know what their priority is, how fast a deal is moving, and just to see what's coming down my way. So it's the active engagement and constant checking in with corp dev, because their timelines are, I'm sure you've seen, they're really slow until they're not, until you get to almost a term sheet, and then it's like, drop everything, let's go. So I try to involve myself as early as possible to know what's coming down the pipeline.
All right, I have a couple questions around that because you mentioned
Yeah.
two distinct scenarios that I come across, whether you're part of the corp dev team or sitting outside corp dev team. What's actually
Mm-hmm.
better?
Verdict's still out. Verdict is still out. It's funny because probably the biggest thing I notice is if I'm part of corp dev, then I hear everything, right? You get the whole 9 yards, the hundreds of companies they scope for investments, for ventures, for partnerships, and for acquisitions, for acqui-hires. You hear all of it and you want to get involved in all of it, or you actually don't know which ones you should get involved in when. It's like a grab bag. But it's good because you get to see the full scope of what's coming down your way. But if I don't report into corp dev, I only hear about things when they hit a certain threshold, right? When it's 60% likely to happen, 70% likely to happen, already presented to board. And then that's when I can really dedicate my effort into it. So verdict's still out. Both have pros and cons. Not sure which one's the right way to do it yet.
Okay, now I hear about getting involved earlier from 90% of the people involved with integration.
Yeah.
How early?
So that's kind of what I'm struggling with, because how early is too early, right? The 60-70% threshold, I think, is the best. Right when you're about to do a term sheet, when you're about to submit a memo to the board or leadership team, if I get to see that and be part of that conversation and start commenting and start thinking about the what next, that I think is ideal. Knowing way too early when we have first conversations with the founders, that is almost too early.
But even then, couldn't you bring some insights to the table and say, hey, you're building this model out and you're putting these assumptions in there? Let's talk through some of these assumptions. Wouldn't you have some
Yeah.
perspectives on that since you're the one that has to carry it out?
So the funny thing is, I typically love to have a perspective on that and have a lot to say in the background. But I realize a lot of integration planning is a lot of what we can or can't do. I'm usually the one saying, oh, this is what you want to do, but we have to be mindful it'll take a year, not the 3 months that you want. And no one wants to hear that at the beginning when you're in the middle of negotiations and trying to court a company, right? You don't want someone from integration saying, oh, that sounds like a brilliant big idea and lots of fun. But then you have Johanna coming in saying, oh, but we really can't do that. So they often don't. I'm the voice in the back of corp dev's head at the very beginning, but they usually don't want me bringing all the obstacles.
Yeah, you're the voice you want to keep out of their head till they
Yeah.
absolutely have to.
Until they're like ready to hear the whole 9 yards, right? Because what they start out with is, oh, this is the big vision. We have this amazing plan for our companies to join. These are how our team's going to merge. It's going to be a beautiful partnership. And then you have me saying, okay, but it'll be really difficult because finance, accounting, tax reasons, customer relationships. Like I'm the one who brings in the whole 9 yards
They
that
view
they
you as a
sometimes don't
party
look for.
pooper.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a little bit of a party pooper.
Can, Joanna, can you walk me through the steps in developing an M&A integration program?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting you asked that because, yeah, coming into WeWork, it was a really, really immature process, but we built it into, I thought, an amazing process with an awesome ecosystem of partners throughout the company who we did deals with every time, and it was a well-oiled machine. At Twilio, when I was there, same thing. You start from nothing, but then you build it from ground up, and everyone's marching to the same beat. And at Coinbase, I hope to do the same. So the way I've been approaching it is that first, what I love to do, especially because these companies they're disrupting the industry in whatever industry they've been in. So I always want to listen first. What is the secret sauce? Understand the lay of the land. How is the org structured? Who are my key stakeholders and how do they operate? How do they manage their teams? How do they communicate with their ecosystem and their leadership? How do we make decisions? Even that's a big one for us because when you're moving so quickly and reorging all the time, no one knows who makes decisions anymore. So my first thing is to just listen, understand, codify some processes, document as much as I can. Once I have some processes mapped out of what they've done in the past for acquisitions, who's usually involved, what works, what hasn't worked, that's when I start bringing in my experience and matching up with programs and processes that have worked previously. And I always have to do that a little bit delicately because you want your company to move super quickly, but you also have to bear in mind how scalable is it, right? I've been in situations when companies I work for can't scale, so we just hire more folks to cover our bases. But is that really the right way of thinking about it? So that's kind of my tough position of we're growing so quickly, we're getting an influx of talent and people through acquisitions, and then how do we actually build this into something that's repeatable and scalable? So that's when I kind of try to marry the previous way of working with my experience and building out a new program for the company. So once I had this program mapped out, I love to partner with the business units as well to get their partnership on it. Because a lot of times I can say, hey, I think this is going to work for corporate technology because it's what I've seen in the past. And then they can say, no, this is not how we do things at all. We don't use Jira, or we do, or we use something different, or we use something homegrown. And so it's less about what I bring to the table and more about being a thought partner with the business unit leadership to build out this program. And so that's kind of the first big part I like to chew. But then after that, I think it really becomes important when you socialize it. Socializing and getting buy-in from leadership in your ecosystem and your ecosystem like team is so important because documents and processes are great, but if no one wants to do it, if no one actually believes in it, if no one thinks it's helpful, it's dropped like a hat. No one will actually follow it. So my big thing is socializing it, about getting buy-in from leadership, and then lastly, actually trying it out. I kid you not, Kison, the number of acquisitions I've done and the number of lessons learned I've conducted, there are always lessons learned. And I think there will always be lessons learned for me. I can never always cover my bases. Every company is different. Every acquisition is different. Every region in the world is different. Every founder is different. So it's always trial and error. No program is perfect. You always have to approach it in a way that it's dynamic and it's breathing and it's living and it's always improving.
These are some great points. I like how you go from doing this formal discovery, really taking the time to understand, you understand what the current issues are, things of that sort. Then you're getting alignment with the other leaders that you're going to be working with. And then you create this feedback loop. So you're capturing some lessons learned, making improvements incrementally as you go. Um, I want to dig into that change management piece because I feel like that's what everybody struggles with at the end of the day, where nobody wants the new person coming in to make change. And it comes in multiple ways, even from you developing the integration program to the companies that you're acquiring.
Mhm.
How are you getting that alignment? And I ultimately believe that change doesn't happen unless there's a compelling reason to change. So I'm curious sort of your philosophy or approach to getting the alignment to be able to drive some of those changes that you see are needed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've had the luxury of coming into companies that have previously done quite a number of acquisitions before they even hire me. So whenever I've joined, I meet everyone and they immediately know that this is a pain point for them. So I have the luxury where they say, "Thank God you're here. We've needed this cross company coordination and connective tissue because we haven't had it before." So the proving that this is needed in the company is not so hard. But to your second question, like change management, how do we actually get this to be bought in? And that's when it is a lot of bottoms up work of constantly just understanding the processes and how I can slot in a different way of thinking. So it's a lot of thought partnership. So every team will operate their their roadmap, their priorities, how they trickle down information across the org a little differently. So it's for me to sit with them a lot, have a ton of meetings with them, understand how they want to approach it, and then add suggestions. I am hardly any sort of specialist in any company. I'm more of a jack of all trades. So my positioning usually is a thought leader. I'll sit with you, understand what your priorities are, and then I'll kind of say, okay, well, this acquisition wants to focus on this. This is what leadership wants. This is what we're making the investment for. How do you think you can marry your prior way of thinking to how I'm trying to accomplish this goal? And that's when we discuss and formulate new plans, which is why it's so important, I think, to have a dedicated stakeholder who's interested in M&A and wants to work on it and is willing to kind of stretch their role a little bit, right? Like like when you're trying to build a company, you're like, I'm going to do A, B, and C. This is how I set goals. This is it for 2020. But then you have to readjust and say, well, now we have this huge acquisition coming in. My first three priorities have to be deprioritized because now I need more resources to focus on integration activities. So there's no way that I can tell someone that that's what they need to do. It's always me partnering with them, getting their input, seeing what they can stretch, what they can move around, and how we can work together. So to your point about change management, it's a slow process, but you're exactly right. Otherwise, you can't get buy-in and you can't get people committed to this special project that I'm asking them to do outside of their day job.
You spend the time to really understand them, to get in their head or get their perspective first, and then you're using that to think of the path to get to them aligned with the goal that they need to be at.
Yeah.
Basically,
Absolutely. Hey, and I gotta be honest, it's not entirely selfless. I learned so much. I learned so much throughout that process. One of the favorite things I had about Twilio is we have a team called Super Network, and they're focused on building out the infrastructure for connectivity around the world. And never in a million years did I think I would learn about that. And they took so much time with me just to explain all the needs of their business, all their priorities, what they needed from me if I wanted to enter a new market, what the hardware they need to build out, the shipping, the customs associated with it, the cost, who actually where the touch points are. Like never in a million years, they needed my help to help them build out their roadmap, but I also learned so much. So it's not entirely selfless, I'll say that.
but being an avid learner is the underlying skill that ultimately you need to really drive some of the changes.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
then
Yeah. Especially in these industries are, I mean, a plug for all the companies I've ever worked for. I think they are disrupting their various industries in different ways. And if I'm not constantly trying to learn from them, I'm going to be left behind and I can't, you know? So it comes with it.
very cool. Um, within that, there's a lot of management. Do you have an approach that you follow in terms of how you get things done, how you get others to get things done, and just, I think that's one of the biggest challenges I hear with integration. You start with the deal and it just continuously expands with a myriad of activities that need to get completed. How do you handle
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. My approach is a little bit more hands-on. Going back to what we are saying, I love to learn and it's helped me actually plug in. I think whenever a team is too strapped, or if things change so quickly that they don't have time to pivot, I'll lean in as if I'm like part of their team. So if, I don't know, let's say compensation, that's something actually I've done a lot. When you have a total rewards team that's super strapped, I'll be the one who steps in, helps with those conversations during due diligence. I'll do the side by side and I'll make a recommendation based on whatever knowledge I have about that company and our company. And then it's easier for the total rewards team to respond to what I proposed, right? Because I have full picture. I've seen this happen before, as opposed to just giving them a blank slate and saying, hey, I need you to tell me what the new compensation structure is, which then oftentimes people think, wow, that's a lot of work you're asking me to do. So I think the luck that I have is that I get to kind of slot in and help out every team as they need. And that's kind of how I get things to push the needle.
Well, I guess one thing with your role is maybe a little different than similar roles in different companies is you're in these high growth organizations. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they're sort of transforming in their own ways, just the nature of their business line. How do you sort of balance that between carrying out your integration objectives, but still trying not to disrupt this pace of growth at a rapid rate that's happening with the organization? So,
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's kind of like an agile framework, right? Every day is different. No 2 days will be the same. It's constantly learning. Everyone's roadmaps will change. I've been at companies before where I kid you not, if we set OKRs at the beginning of the year, they'll change at least 5 times. Whether you like it or not, your resources change, your priorities change, and acquisition comes. So you have to move a ton of things off, or we restructure the org, or we hire a new executive and want teams to move in different directions. So it's I guess the overarching answer I have there is just to stay agile, stay on top of it, stay agile, and continue listening to what's going on.
now it's a big buzzword, but I like the way it sounds like from you. It's more mindset than anything else. Like forget about all the buzzwords, the acronyms, following this and this, reading my book, whatever it is. It's just literally have such a change oriented mindset that you're in an environment that's going to be constantly changing and just go with it.
Yeah, I love that you say that change oriented mindset. And that's probably a better buzzword than agile, right? Because agile is usually tied to the PMI framework, but change oriented is that like anything can change at any minute and you have to be okay with it, right? I think I've in consulting a lot of times when small things change at much larger companies, the entire process is broken. And everyone doesn't know what to do. Tons of meetings now about how to restructure everything, and our approach is entirely changed. Whereas in these high growth tech companies, when major things change, everyone's almost so used to it. They're like, okay, what next? And I think that's what I thrive in too, right? It's always someone coming in and be like, hey, how about we think about this differently? And then everyone goes, okay, let's play it out. And you play it out, and if it's the right thing to do, we do it.
Very
And I think that's a great way to continue growing as a company. And I will say it's not always fun when you're leading these large scale acquisitions and trying to welcome in tons of employees into your org that itself is changing. But you got to roll with the punches, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
I mean, do you have an example of? Cause I'm curious about when you are going through an integration, but then there's almost something that comes up that may be a great opportunity to sort of shift plans to capture additional value. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's the whole where the agile mindset adds the most value, especially for the companies that do their famed transformative M&A. Do you have an example of something like that where you've worked on an integration project and during it, it's like, whoa, we got to change plans because this is going to help create some value?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you an without going into too many details. This has actually happened more than once. So it's not so common that large pivots are happening. And easy example, a lot of times many times I've acquired a company and we're saying we just want their people, or we want their tech, or we want the region, or we want their customers, but we're going to deprecate their platform. We're going to deprecate their product. We're going to move customers over. That is just a very common way to approach integration activities, because you come in with a bit of hubris, right? As the acquiring company, and you're like, we don't need what they have. We don't need their connections. We only want to parse out this value, and it's going to help us grow so much. But then more often, like not more often than not, but a few times I've gone in, and then after a couple months of integration planning with the acquired company leadership, you actually dig into their systems and you're like, actually, they do have something really good going on here. they really do have some like soft footing in the market or the tech, or they have some relationship with employees and they can attract talent in a way that we can't as the acquirer. So then you say, you kind of like dial back and you're like, you know what, maybe we don't deprecate the platform, or maybe we don't rebrand them, or maybe we don't get rid of all their customers. Maybe we want to keep them and grow that customer base because they're able to give customers some sort of value that we as a larger company can't. So that's definitely been something like large scale integration plan has changed. Everyone is affected when you do that, but at the same time, you can capture so much more value that way. So not uncommon.
Cool. Sounds like an area to write a book on.
Gotta learn from you before I can do that.
We'll learn from each other and co-author.
Yeah,
What?
exactly.
Well, we talked about getting involved with diligence early. What are the benefits of building out your integration process pre-diligence?
Yeah, so I think there's so much value into building out your integration process pre-diligence, because a lot of the times I've seen, or at least early on in my career, the traditional way of thinking is we do diligence and then you take the outputs of diligence and you develop an integration plan. The milestones, the planning, the huge project plan that everyone has to align to. But then there's so much information that you could have gathered during due diligence, right? Like you're just, a lot of times when you repeat the questions. So for instance, in due diligence, you ask, what are your benefit plans? Because employment counsel wants to know if you're up to snuff, if you're actually providing benefits that are legal to all your employees, or if your premiums are okay, you're not overcharging your employees, if you have any legal issues at hand. But then 2 months later, you go into integration planning, you ask the same questions. You say, and say, hey, what are your benefit plans? You hear about all the plans, but instead of trying to find out if it's legal, you're now trying to find out, okay, well, what's important to employees? Like, is having cheaper premiums on your health insurance plans important to employees? Maybe, maybe not. And that's so important when we try to merge things like that. So that's why I love to have integration early on during diligence and maybe even before, to start thinking about that. Like, how do we kill two birds with one stone? It also helps us move faster, and it reduces the amount of conversations and documentation that founders have to provide. And you of all people know, the questions we throw at founders are massive, like a million tabs, tons of questions, so much redundant conversations. They're exhausted. They still have to run their own business. They're making a huge decision. So that's why I just think it's so important to marry these two processes and get ahead of it so that we can start planning ahead without wearing down founders with redundant questions and planning later on. We're just jumping ahead of it.
The big thing is you're basically avoiding having to re-diligence the deal for your integration efforts, which essentially eliminates a lot of the redundant requests that go to the target company and gets them burnt out early. Uh,
Exactly.
so that makes a lot of sense. What does the mechanics of that build out process look like?
Yeah. So usually during the diligence phase, you have all these folks in corporate development focused on red flags, right? That's what we always hear, red flags. What's going to kill the deal? But to be honest, I've never seen, I'm going to say with 99% certainty, I've never seen like total rewards kill a deal. So for them, I like to have them in the conversation early. Yes, you can ask your legal questions, but having them ask a little bit step further. And that's usually when I come in, a little bit of that like partnership and coaching before the call and saying, okay, it's great to ask this one question, but can we push on this a little bit more? And oftentimes even I'll jump in and just be like, wait a second, can you tell me more about that? So not just total rewards, but let's say payroll or accounting, right? It's like you'll ask, oh, how are you doing your books? Are you doing it get US GAAP, or are you doing it international like accounting practices? And they'll be like, oh yeah, we're doing it this. And I was like, oh, great. But then it's on me to either coach my business unit partner or for me to just speak up and say, well, that's not how we're doing it though. Like we're not accounting in that way. That's not the frequency that we do it. We do it monthly or we do it quarterly. You're doing it off cycle. What's the uplift going to take when we do integration? Like, is this actually something that we can write off and be like, okay, later on we'll tackle it? Or is this a big gap? Is this something we can't actually overcome? And in the US, maybe not too big of a deal, but when you think about internationally, right? If we're acquiring a company for the first time that's international and we're so used to US based accounting practices and reporting and SEC filings, like when we when we acquire someone in Asia that doesn't look at finances the same way we do, just even though they're doing it fine and above board, integrating that with what we currently have is a huge uplift. So that's why I usually like to have integration conversations up front.
So walk me through the relationship, because it sounds like you have integration conversations with the company that you're going to be integrating,
Mhm.
and want to get a sense of like who you're actually talking to there. What does that look like? And then the corp dev team, because they're the ones that have been steering the deal, and they still technically are until it closes. And what does that conversation look like, and how are they looped in?
Yeah, so usually it's kind of it's definitely a partnership of all sorts. So you have corp dev who leads due diligence. I work with them in the very early stages to kind of identify integration milestones, obstacles before we even loop in functional stakeholders. When we get to the due diligence conversations, that's usually when corp dev will still lead, the functional stakeholder will still lead, but then I'll kind of be in the back end, kind of like coaching on the back end of how do we think about the what if, helping the leaders across the org think about the what if and poking them to really think about long-term planning. So it's kind of in the back end. I'll still join in, and just more tactically, that's when I start developing my high-level integration roadmap of like what our biggest obstacles are and trying to align across the board. Timing, timing of how everything should happen together and how it should stack. Not unlike event planning, right? Like if you were to plan an event, you need people A, B, and C to arrive at a certain time. You need your caterer to now come join the conversation. Then you need your DJ to show up at a different time and your balloons to drop at a different time. So while I get to sit into these due diligence conversations, it's on me to say, okay, so what are some of the gating integration milestones that we have? What do we need to align? What is the dependencies to something else? Mapping those out and then kind of feeding it back to the functional stakeholders and saying, does this sound right to you?
How do you build out optimal milestones for the various work streams integration, and what do you use to track them?
Yeah, it kind of differs. Can't speak too much about Coinbase since I just started, but at other places, it kind of depends on what the company likes to use, what tools they already have in place. But ultimately, it dials down to what the business is comfortable with. Kind of like I was saying, these companies are moving so quickly, you can't just force a project plan upon them. And I learned that as a consultant moving in industry. I came in with a big spreadsheet and said, these are the milestones, these are your trackers, this is what everyone needs to fill in. Give me your dependencies, your due date, your status, like the whole 9 yards. And not even joking, Kison, they just ignored me. Like everyone across the board just ignored my big spreadsheet. No one touched it. They're just like, this, we're not doing it. This is too much. So I'm so focused when you work at a hyper growth company to be a partner to them, to see what they respond to, how they like to track their metrics. What are their existing metrics too? What have they already set for 2020? And how do I build in my priorities to align with their priorities so that like two birds with one stone, I'm helping them, they're helping me, and we're working on it together. Like I can't just force upon them all these new metrics that they know nothing about.
From what I'm hearing, it sounds like they need deal room. I'll be sure to have one of our reps reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. Always open to it. Always open to it.
What so besides that, I guess I'm curious, when we mention of working with these companies, they're ever changing, you're approaching it with a change oriented mindset. Are there other technologies or tools that you use to sort of keep that robust dialogue going? It
Yeah, when
sounds like you're
you
not traditional where you're using email and scheduling reoccurring weekly meetings for the first full day of the work week.
Yeah, so it's kind of a mixed bag. As we were chatting about before, it's this change oriented mindset that anything can always happen. So you have to be able to pivot really quickly. It's a lot of multimedia. I'll say multimedia, hyper aware approach because we're moving so quickly. Some people respond to Slack, some people respond to email, some people like face to face calls, some people even like just personal phone calls. So my approach is just all over the board. Of course, I'm big on documentation. So I'll always document everything, all the processes, all the decisions that have changed and the implications. But then my approach is pretty bespoke. I'll Slack people saying, hey, make sure you check this out. By the way, there was a change. Or if I think there's more dependencies, I'll be like, hey, can you hop on a call? Let's talk through something that just happened. What do you think? What are your responses? Going back to that partner, the business unit partnership I'm so focused on, it's so important that I don't just take a decision and say, okay, this is what's going to happen next. It's okay, well, that this is an opinion of one person. How will this affect you? How should we be thinking about it? How does that affect what we had already previously decided? So I'm multimedia faceted person who approached it all angles. I also think if you're moving so quickly and you're making decisions that change every day, you can't expect that if you drop something into a document or a Kanban or a smart sheet that people are going to see. So I'll do that, but you got to notify and bring everyone to everyone's attention and make sure that we continue marching to the same beat of the drum.
You're on a different level. I mean, this is like hyper dynamic project management.
Yeah, maybe that's what we should coin. Hyper dynamic multimedia project management.
Well, by the way, while we're talking, I'm slacking a note to our sales team to make sure they show you our Slack integration, since we do have that built in, so you can throw those tickets right in there.
Oh, that would be fantastic. Yeah, we're all the companies I've worked for recently are very Slack oriented. It's definitely becoming more prevalent in my life to learn how to use it more.
Well, you got the point. I think that I've learned is it eliminates the whole idea that everybody has to be at the same place at the same time to have a conversation. You sort of
Yeah.
just connect that whole thing, and even if you're in a different time zone, you can always catch up on the thread, and then you get the faster responses because I'll see it in my app and know, hey, this is internal. I'm going to answer this. I don't care what state of mind or what I'm doing. I'm going to respond versus the myriad of emails you get. I'll check that a couple times a day and that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. I've also, I mean, we're all aware. I'm the type of person that wants zero like unread emails in my inbox, but we all know the people that have like hundreds. So if you email, exactly, if you email someone, there's a high likelihood they won't read it, and it usually has. You're really codifying, documenting really important information. So that's why I'm so focused on also just giving them a call, also slacking them, and weirdly enough, at all these high growth companies, you're marrying really fast paced Gen Z millennials who work all the time, who are on the computer all the time, on the phone all the time. So they receive information so quickly. But then you also have the older folks from the leadership team or the people who are not used to it, right? You haven't really bought into like Slack or being on your smartphone 24/7, and that's you result to emails. So I just think because of this weird place that we're in, you have to kind of approach people at all angles.
So you're not slacking board members about upcoming opportunities?
Yeah, someday I'm just gonna like Slack them.
When
Hey,
when
found
you
this new
become a board
acquisition.
member, you're going to be telling people that.
Oh my god. Yeah, let's hope not.
What's a BPM and why have you found them beneficial?
Yeah, I love that you bring that up. Coming out of our prior conversation, I love the idea of BPMs, and that's something that Twilio actually does. I actually don't know many or any other companies that do this, but I thought it's so important to the way that we integration planned and moved. So what a BPM is, it stands for B is the big picture, P are your priorities, and M are your milestones. So this kind of starts at the big picture of what are we even doing? Why are we even here? Priorities is kind of identifying the values. What are our value drivers? What is making us actually want to pursue this opportunity? And milestones are really the things you're tracking towards. The more numbers oriented, kind of like the key results of an OKR, so to speak. And the way I love this so much is because, like we're saying, you're moving so quickly in an acquisition, especially at a tech company in Silicon Valley. The reason you're acquiring a company may be different than that you thought about yesterday versus tomorrow, or the way you get there will be different, or what's important or what an obstacle you discover something during due diligence, you discover something past due diligence that changes the entire way you think about it. But what's so important about having a BPM, which is that big picture and your key values, is that when you have a deal team of 60 people working towards on this acquisition and executing upon the integration, it's kind of like North Star. Like even if little things come up, you look at this North Star and you say, okay, well, take a step back, take a breather. We all get in the weeds, but take a step back. Why are we doing this first place? Are we doing this because we really just want a presence in a new country? Okay, if that's the reason, then don't get so hung up on, I don't know, customer acquisition or branding, right? Like branding is important, but if we really just want to have a presence in a new country, that's what we should be focusing on first and foremost. That's what we should be using board of director time for or executive team time for is to talk about how we really establish that foothold. So that's why I just love the idea of going into any acquisition. Honestly, I love to kick off due diligence process with my ecosystem with that big picture. I think it's so important. Of even as you're going to due diligence, kind of like we said, you have to have the integration lens on. So what's the lens that you put on for this acquisition in particular? And that big picture really sets it so that we're all aligned and we don't need to check in with every little decision made. So it's a little bit, you give everyone a little bit more autonomy in running their processes that way as well.
So when I talk to people about what goes wrong in M&A, it's a very common thing to talk about the loss of alignment around the deal objectives. And this sounds like a good approach to it. But how do you make it stick? Because you mentioned you bring it up in the kickoff,
Mhm.
but a month later, 3 months later, how does it sort of stick? And how do you, and you mentioned it even changes.
Yeah.
So I guess like what what's the consistency to make sure it's utilized and referenced?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of kind of the M of the BPMs is the metrics or the milestones, right? So it kind of trickles down. If your big picture changes, then you need to reevaluate your priorities and your metrics. And what I typically like to do is every week or every month, depending on how large the acquisition is, you have this feedback loop with all your stakeholders and say, hey, remember this is the big picture. These are the milestones tied to it. How are you tracking towards it? And then later on during the integration, I actually do regular checkpoints with the executive team. And then I have one person from each of the functional teams come and report out on how they're actually working towards that big picture. And that's really helpful so we don't lose sight of what we're actually doing. We don't get lost in the weeds. We don't get distracted. It's like, hey, you actually have to come to our CEO and say, this is what I'm doing with my team to progress towards what you originally wanted to do and get out of this deal.
Got it. So you own it, you update it, you
Mhm.
reference it continuously, and then in between you send a bunch of Slack messages and video calls.
Yep, all the Slacks, all the calls. Especially in a remote first world, I'm a big fan of just jumping on the phone. I think there's just so much value when anything changes in an acquisition or decisions are made or something comes up to see people's reaction, right? Kison, if I told you one day that we're going to acquire a company in Nigeria for reason X, but now we're going to do it in Ghana instead, if I sent you a Slack, you could just be like, okay. As opposed to if I just hopped on the phone with you, I'd probably see a huge reaction from you. And I get to see your immediate response of, oh shoot, well now I have to consider CDE instead of XYZ.
You ruined my next 5 nights, woman. Like, what'd you do?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And then at least some humanity comes into it and I go, okay, well, how can I help you?
Right.
Going back to what your previous saying of when people are so strapped, it's easy, like I'm used to the working 24 hours a day. So if I notice that you're strapped, then it's like, okay, well let me help you out, or let me see if I can talk to leadership and how do I reallocate your resources to help out here, as opposed to the Slack that's just like, okay, sure.
Well, so it sounds like you're sort of like plugging a lot of things in places when you're going through integration, because obviously a lot of things come up and
Yeah.
people are going to need these additional resources. We talk a lot about synergies in these deals. And I mean, what's your approach? Because I feel like companies have a different philosophy around it. They're very different. Some sort of, that's all they drive the deal around and they get really detailed and nitty gritty about it, where others could care less.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how you track it and, what's your approach in managing it?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I definitely noticed earlier in my career when you were working for Fortune 100 companies, synergies are so important, right? What vendors can we consolidate? Which contracts can we get rid of? Like, how do we find redundancies? And it's just really a line item, right? Like saying, hey, we are now gaining this acquisition for their revenue and we're saving money on these synergies. And Kison, I have not looked at that in quite some time. I think we're when you're at a company that's just high flying and focused on growth, like that is the least of our worries. It's interesting. I think that's just definitely a more traditional way of thinking about it. Synergies are of course important. At the end of the day, when I have downtime, I would love to be able to look back and consolidate things and clean things up a little bit. And I have done that when I do have the free time. I do focus on like vendor contracts. systems migrations, things of that nature that will get us dollar value synergy. But I wouldn't see that as a priority as much as it used to be.
It's almost like a different category. Everybody talks about cost and revenue synergies, and here you're thinking growth synergies.
Yeah.
Like the examples you
Yeah,
gave were more of like, hey, there's a lot of value to capture with a lot of these approaches or things we're discovering during integration that we may not notice during diligence.
exactly. Yeah, my synergies today are no longer cost synergies. It's more like, wait, these two people are so brilliant. If they sat in the same room, they could probably build this amazing product for us. And that's what I'm going to capitalize. That's what I'm going to focus on. The IP, the tech, the knowledge share is so vast in the companies now that that's definitely more of a focal point.
Makes a lot of sense. So I have a couple questions here.
Sure.
What do you do to ensure that there's realistic synergistic fit to achieve ROI?
Realistic, synergistic fit to achieve ROI. Can you explain that a little bit further?
I didn't write this question. It's in our Q&A.
Oh,
That there's a
I
real
should take a look at that.
synergistic fit to. I think this goes back when we're talking about diligence and how you get involved in there,
Mm.
and maybe when you're sort of evaluating some of those views around synergies.
Perhaps it's more culture fit is what I would think, to make sure that the organizations can actually work together to work well and to achieve the ROI, especially with the team, I guess, coming together.
Yeah, this
Culture, yeah, I'm looking at this. I I think this is more on culture fit is where I would actually see the biggest obstacle. And Kison, I'm sure you know, if we were to dive into culture, that would be another hour for us. I'm not sure I have the right answer. It's a lot of conversations. It's a lot of evaluation. It's a lot of value setting. I think more often than not, going back to Twilio, I have only the best things to say about that company. First of all, they are so focused on the Twilio magic that we would look at companies and we see, is the founder, is the way that they work, does it actually align with the Twilio magic? Do they truly care about being an owner when all else fails? Right? Like if shit hits the fan, are you willing to step up and not pass the buck and really, and we also said draw the owl to build something out of nothing, right? To create a new process and to make the best out of what you're given. So that kind of mindset was something we cared about a lot in the companies we acquire. Are they also of the same, are they cut from the same cloth? And if they are, then our teams will work together and hopefully jive well together and achieve ROI.
So your view around synergistic fit to deliver the ROI is really more around culture.
Yeah, I mean, I'm super biased with tech companies, right? Like we're not really developing like a physical product. We have no supply chain issues. Our highest cost are our people, our talent, our people, their capabilities, and the way that we work well together, right? 1+1, hopefully with two people cut from the same cloth and really excited and curious, will be three.
Awesome. We'll save the culture details,
Yeah.
the sequel of this interview. Do you tend to keep the founders around? What is your view about earnouts and their implications for integration?
Yeah, great question. This one goes either way because this depends on the founder entirely. I don't think this is something that an acquired company should decide ever. It's always should be an open conversation of, do you even want to stay around, right? Are you a serial entrepreneur? Why are you selling your company? Are you doing it for the money and you want to exit and start something new? Do you actually want to join us for a greater mission? Do you actually think that you also see the value we see in you and you want to be part of our growth? I think that should be a completely open conversation. And it also helps us structure the deal, right? Instead of designing all these complicated retention strategies in the purchase agreement, a clear conversation of, hey, I want to exit is like, okay, then we won't try to retain you for 5 years where you're unhappy, we're unhappy. It's like, this is what you want, then you should be able to step away. If you actually only want to see this for 3 years because you want to help out with the integration and you think that that's all the gas you have left in you, then great. We'll try to structure a retention program to help you stay for 3 years and do the best that we can do to support you. So I don't think this is ever something that a buyer should determine, because then you just get into an uncomfortable situation
Have
when
you
the
seen
founder
that?
becomes disengaged.
You worked on a deal where you're like, this guy shouldn't be on this long of a retention program.
Yeah, absolutely. it's so common, right? When you're acquiring companies, you have these serial entrepreneurs who just love to build. They just want to create something new. They want to create their new team. They're super opportunistic, so they're brilliant minds who just see opportunity everywhere and want to like fill that gap. And to have them plug into a much larger company where you are growing really quickly, it becomes more bureaucratic, even though you're trying to accomplish a bigger goal. That just doesn't align with them as people. And so I feel like that just becomes a little bit trapped for them.
That's some real good uncut truth there.
A little too honest.
Yeah, I like it. That's what M&A science stands for. Pure science.
Pure science.
Yeah, no fluff. Let's see. Maybe I got one more. There's a question about Slack, but I think it's around Slack integration, which you can visit
That's more
dealroom.net.
deal room.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
can learn dealroom.net. Before you actually purchase the seller, don't you do the due diligence on operation by asking at least 150 or so questions to get through the idea of integration?
Yeah, it's not even 150. I'm sure it's like hundreds.
Yeah.
It's definitely hundreds of questions on due diligence before we actually integrate. Maybe what you're trying to get at is before we even start to look at integration. So I mean, I guess the purpose of this talk was more to say that integration planning does come in during the due diligence phase process, right? Like integration planning, if you're doing it post acquisition, you're late. You're really late to the game.
So really, there's a strong overlap where you can pretty much reutilize a lot of the diligence information for integration.
Yeah,
Would you
absolutely.
say you should have access to all of it?
I mean, I like to have access to all of it. The more information, the better. The more I can plan. Um, the more obstacles I can identify. And also, I mean, simple example is if I know that one of our teams is looking to expand their product in a certain way, or we're trying to enter a new market, but at the same time we're trying to acquire in a new market or acquire a product, that's something that's good to know ahead of time. So at least I can start having those conversations and marrying the two parts of the company so that we all talk. So
Cool.
not too early, because then I'm just spinning up an entire integration plan for not, but early enough that I can at least identify those high level conversations that need to happen.
It's a great message for corp dev people out there. Last question. What's the craziest thing you've seen in M&A?
So I get this question a lot.
You get this
The
question a lot? I thought I'm the only person that asked this question.
I know you started it out, so you're the founder of this question. No, the story that I love to share with friends is probably not one of those crazy ones you typically get where something went massively wrong or something you didn't expect happened. The one story I get is when I started at Twilio. I loved it because within maybe a month and a half, like we did an acquisition so quickly and I didn't know anyone. I was still in that discovery phase that we're talking about, right? I'm just still trying to meet everyone, know how processes work, but we were fast moving and it was an international acquisition. And I was like, okay, well, these are the people I'd like to meet. I met them. And then they were like, this is the timeline. And I was like, okay, shoot, well, I need to meet the team. And then, so I just went to that location and I brought, I think it was like 18 other Twilio folks with me. Cause I was like, I need you guys as my subject matter experts. We're entering a new market. We're entering a new market. We're breaking ground, new region for us. Like I need all these subject matter experts to be on the ground with me for about 2 weeks.
This is
And
overseas.
this is overseas, new
You brought
region.
half the company with you.
Yeah, I did. I did. Because I was just like, well, I'm not a subject matter expert in any of these things, but I know what I need to be informed on. We're essentially establishing an entirely new entity for us in a language that none of us spoke. Actually, we did find someone in the company that spoke the language, so we brought her with us. But it was just like, I literally just started, I'm just getting my footing, and I was like, guys, we got to go. And so we went, and I think it's the craziest thing because it came together so beautifully, I thought like the welcome events, the way we were received, where the company's going now, how much we've grown using that entity and that company, and the relationships that we've been able to establish in that region because of this hub. I think it, surprising or not, was just the craziest, most beautiful thing that came together. And the support I got from my ecosystem, hands down, was unexpected but very welcomed.
That's an amazing cultural experience at that as well.
Yeah, it was funny because when I did the welcome session, so I usually kick off the welcome session like, "Hey, you've been acquired. This is what it means for you." I I forget how this came up, but someone during the networking was like, "Oh, so how long have you been at Twilio?" And I was like, "Do I tell them? Do I tell them I also just joined? Or how do I say this?"
Wow,
Pretty funny.
that's awesome.
But yeah, good times.
Hey, I want to thank you for the time today. This was a great interview. Those of you listening want to follow us or challenge us on Peloton. I have a hashtag MA Science going on.
Let's
Johanna's
do
gonna be my first person to join that hashtag since I just made it the other day. Um, Till next time. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks for having me. This is awesome to chat.
My pleasure. Here's to the deal.
Bye.